A Democratic senator is going on trial for corruption charges, and Republicans are hoping to get his seat. The corruption trial for Sen. Bob Menendez, DNJ, is still moving forward. U.S. District Court Judge William Walls ruled Monday that he would not throw out bribery charges against the senator, ensuring that a jury will decide on Menendez's guilt. The next step for the trial, now that the prosecution has concluded its case, is for Menendez's team to present its defense, and the outcome could have major implications for the balance of power in the United States Senate and for the Republican agenda. Prosecutors are alleging that Menendez accepted expensive gifts from a wealthy supporter and friend, Dr. Solomon Melgen, in exchange for intervening on behalf of the doctor's business interests with government officials and trying to get visas for the doctor's girlfriends. Menendez asserts he's done nothing wrong. We don't yet know whether a jury will find Menendez innocent or guilty, and a conviction can't by itself remove him from office. If he is convicted, though, he is sure to face immediate pressure to resign from the Senate, and Republican leaders will likely hold a vote on whether he should be expelled, a vote that would need two-thirds Senate support to succeed. And lurking behind arguments about the specific charges here will be one massively important fact. If Menendez does leave the Senate in the next 3 months, his replacement would be appointed by New Jersey's Republican Governor, Chris Christie, since Christie would be sure to pick a Republican to serve out Menendez's term, which runs out in 2018. That switch would increase the GOP's narrow majority from 52 to 53 seats, which could have serious consequences on a whole host of matters, from tax reform to even perhaps another shot at Obamacare repeal. If Democrats can somehow manage to kick the can down the road for another few months, the partisan stakes of this matter could be lowered dramatically. Democratic nominee Phil Murphy is overwhelmingly favored to win New Jersey's governorship this November. If Menendez left the Senate after a Murphy win in inauguration, he'd just be replaced by another Democrat. But that's why, if Menendez is convicted of anything before mid-January, Republicans would have a big incentive to hold an expulsion vote quickly, a vote that would be a win-win for them and would put Democratic senators in a tough spot. They'd have to vote either to keep a convicted felon in the Senate or to hand Republicans another seat that could be used to advance policies they deeply oppose. 1. Who is Bob Menendez, and what is he on trial for? Menendez, the son of Cuban immigrants, rose to political prominence in Hudson County, New Jersey, in the 1980s, before winning a seat in the House of Representatives in 1992 and then an appointment to a U.S. Senate vacancy in 2006. He's a former chair of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. His politics are standard-issue liberal on most matters, though he's notably more hawkish than most Democrats on foreign policy topics such as Cuba and Iran. But Menendez fell under Justice Department scrutiny for his relationship with a wealthy Florida Dr. Solomon Melgen, whom he often traveled with. In April 2015, prosecutors filed 14 corruption charges against Menendez and 13 against Melgen, arguing that Menendez used his position to benefit Melgen in return for items of value. Prosecutors alleged that Melgen gave Menendez many flights on his company's private jets, and at least one first-class commercial flight. Menendez didn't initially disclose these in Senate ethics filings, and paid Melgen back for some of the flights years later. Use of a Caribbean villa, access to a Dominican resort, and a stay at a luxury Paris hotel, tens of thousands of dollars for his legal defense fund, hundreds of thousands of dollars earmarked to be spent to help his 2012 re-election effort in return. They allege Menendez did several things for Melgen. He met with then Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius over a billing dispute Melgen was having with Medicare, and advocated on Melgen's behalf. In a separate trial, Melgen was convicted earlier this year of defrauding Medicare of more than $90 million from charges stemming from this dispute. He tried to get the State Department to push the Dominican Republic to uphold a contract Melgen had to provide cargo screening in the country's ports. He tried to stop U.S. Customs and Border Protection from donating cargo screening equipment to the Dominican Republic. Because of that same port contract Melgen had, he had his staffers help get tourist or student visas for 3 of Melgen's foreign girlfriends. Menendez has maintained his innocence, and said that while Melgen was a close friend, he did nothing illegal on the doctor's behalf. The Senator's office didn't respond to requests for comment for this article. 2. Which issues will matter most at Menendez trial? In attempting to prove public corruption charges against a politician, prosecutors have to make the case that the defendant knowingly abused his power as part of a corrupt quid pro quo. That is, these prosecutors have to prove that Menendez did or promised to do official acts that Melgen wanted, and that these acts were done in return for the various gifts and other benefits that Melgen sent his way. There's a moderately high bar for just what counts as an official act. In a ruling last year, the Supreme Court overturned former Virginia Gov. Bob McDonnell's corruption convictions, because they related mainly to meetings he had set up and events he had hosted on behalf of a donor. Setting up a meeting, talking to another official, or organizing an event without more does not fit that definition of official act. The justices wrote, instead, they said, such an act must involve a formal exercise of government power. An actual policy change would count. And the justices also said that exerting pressure on another official to change policy or even simply promising to change policy would also count. Prosecutors have argued that Menendez tried to pressure HHS, state, and customs officials on Melgen's behalf in specific meetings and interactions. However, they have presented no evidence that Menendez did those things for Melgen specifically in return for hotel stays, flights, and donations. As a result, the defense tried to get the bribery charges thrown out, but Judge Walz agreed with prosecutors that the case could go forward, saying essentially that Melgen could have been paying off Menendez to get his official help at a later date, even if he had no specific demands at the time. Payment may be made with intent to retain official services on an as-needed basis. Walz said, it's unclear if, in the event of a conviction, that ruling will stand on appeal. But for now, it means the case goes forward, and the next step is for Menendez's team to present its defense. 3. What happens to Menendez's seat if he is convicted? Procedurally, nothing would happen. Members of Congress do not automatically forfeit their offices upon conviction of a crime that constitutes a felony. Jack Maskell of the Congressional Research Service writes, no express constitutional disability or disqualification from Congress exists for the conviction of a crime, other than under the 14th Amendment for certain treasonous conduct. If Menendez were to serve a prison sentence, he of course wouldn't be able to show up for votes in the Senate, but even that wouldn't automatically divest him of his seat. In any case, it's highly unlikely to happen anytime soon, because Menendez would appeal any conviction and accompanying sentence, and that would be a lengthy process. Instead, the conversation about a post-conviction Menendez seat would focus on 2 possibilities: resignation or expulsion. Past precedent indicates that resignation has been the norm. Only 4 sitting senators have ever been convicted of crimes, and 3 resigned after they were convicted. The 4th held on to his seat and appealed his conviction, but then happened to die a few months later. If Menendez chooses not to resign after a conviction, though, there is only one way he can be involuntarily deprived of his seat. 2/3 of the Senate would have to vote to expel him from the chamber. A conviction would surely lead to a major expulsion push from Republican senators. They would argue that allowing a senator convicted of federal corruption charges to hold on to his seat is outrageous, and many of them would also salivate at the prospect of gaining Menendez's seat for their own party through an appointment from Christie. 4. What's the history of expulsion from the Senate? There is very little precedent for it. According to the Senate Historical Office, the Senate has only ever expelled 15 members. That seems like a lot, but 14 of those were expelled for supporting the Confederacy during the Civil War. The other instance occurred all the way back in 1797, when Sen. William Blount of Tennessee was expelled for treason. Now, there have been a few unsuccessful expulsion votes since the Civil War. Sen. Reed Smoot, R.U.T., was targeted for expulsion because he was a Mormon, and he survived. Sen. Bob La Follette, R.Y., was targeted for expulsion for arguing against U.S. entry into World War I. But he survived too. A few senators also survived expulsion votes motivated by corruption scandals. Most recently Sen. William Langer, R.N.D., in 1942. Still, one of the reasons we haven't seen successful expulsion votes is because senators have resigned. Rather than face an expulsion vote they expected to lose. The most recent senator to do so was Bob Packwood, ROR, in 1995, when the Senate Ethics Committee recommended his expulsion over a sexual misconduct and abuse of power scandal. He resigned. Finally, there's another historical precedent that Menendez is probably well aware of, that of Sen. Harrison Williams, DNJ, who held the very same Senate seat Menendez now occupies. Williams was convicted for bribery in the Abscam scandal in May 1981, but he didn't resign his seat right away, and continued to maintain his innocence. The Senate Ethics Committee looked into the matter and unanimously recommended his expulsion in August 1981. Yet after that, it took several more months before the Senate Republican-controlled, but in an era with less partisan polarization, moved toward voting on the expulsion resolution. Once debate did begin and it became clear to Williams that he'd lose the vote, he resigned to avoid the embarrassment in March 1982. 5. What are the prospects for an expulsion vote? As Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell takes stock of Menendez's situation, he knows the following things very well. His best chance to wrest Menendez's seat from Democrats' hands is to act quickly. In the few months Chris Christie still holds New Jersey's governorship, since Democrat Phil Murphy is expected to win this year's election to succeed him. If Murphy does win, he'd be sworn in on January 16, 2018. Though the threshold for success on an expulsion vote is high, 2/3 of the Senate, holding a quick vote is a win-win for Republicans. Either Menendez is in fact expelled, and the GOP gets his seat, or at least 34 Democrats would have to cast a politically toxic vote to let a felon convicted of corruption keep his seat. So in the event of a conviction, McConnell seems highly likely to push for a quick expulsion vote that would either succeed if enough Democrats fear the political consequences otherwise, or, at the very least, force most Democrats to take an ugly and hard-to-defend vote. Now, if New Jersey had a Democratic governor, an expulsion vote for a senator convicted of corruption charges probably would be a matter of bipartisan agreement. But in a year when President Trump and GOP majorities are trying to pass sweeping new partisan bills, Democrats are deathly afraid of handing the GOP another seat. So how they'd respond to a potential expulsion vote isn't yet clear. It's possible that Democratic leaders could argue for a more drawn-out process before moving to an expulsion vote, but delaying it for months would be difficult. The party could let its most vulnerable senators vote for expulsion, while enough of the others grit their teeth and take a tough vote against it. betting that the 2018 elections will focus on Donald Trump and not Bob Menendez, or Democrats could make a public case that an expulsion vote wouldn't really be about Menendez and corruption. It would be about preventing Republicans from getting the final vote to repeal Obamacare. Perhaps Menendez could even announce his resignation with an effective date of January 16, 2018, or later, hoping to defuse the controversy and keep the seat in his party's hands until New Jersey's new governor is sworn in. Alternatively, perhaps an expulsion vote would even succeed, if enough Democrats calculate that voting against it would be too politically costly. The only thing that's clear is that things will get very ugly.